Welcome back to another baseball focused video. Talking about some college baseball again. Just had what was a wild weekend of regionals and filming this on Tuesday night, so about 24 hours removed from the final regional games. So I've had a day to kind of sit and think about what we witnessed over the weekend, which was a lot. So I'm going to jump into not necessarily recapping it because if you're watching this, you probably know what happened over the weekend, but just kind of my 2 cents on what went down, some of the big storylines, and then looking ahead to super regionals this weekend was a lot of fun. Obviously had a bunch of hosts go down, and we're set up for some really good super regional matchups. So we're gonna get into that. And also, I did release my pretty much my full recap article of regionals. I'll have that linked down below, so I encourage you to go check that out. Just some more additional thoughts of mine that I'll go over in here as well. So, without further ado, we'll jump into it. And of course, we will start with arguably the most controversial. Well, I wouldn't say controversial, but kind of the biggest deal of the weekend was the fact that UCLA went down as the number one overall seed. Second year in a row in which the number one overall seed goes down. Last year was Vanderbilt. And also the second year in a row in which the number one overall seed doesn't even get to their regional final. So last year you had Vanderbilt. They were bounced by Wright State last year. I want to say in the yeah, it was in the losers bracket. I believe the winner of that game went on to play Louisville, who Louisville went on to win that regional. And then the same thing this year, UCLA. They lose their first game to St. Mary's, fall into the losers bracket, and then fall to St. Mary's once again, and fail to even get to the regional final. Go 1-2 on the weekend. I do think we all ended up being a little too high on UCLA. For me, I do think you have to reward the resume. UCLA had the best resume when it came to wins and losses. Okay, they had the best record in the nation. They got through the Big Ten. They lost two games in the Big Ten, I believe, was 28-2. They finished, and you can't you have to reward that resume. I think you can reward the resume and still say that Georgia Tech was the better team. We're gonna get to Georgia Tech in a second here. But I still do think that you still have to reward the resume and give UCLA the number one overall seed. I know coming in the tournament, there were a lot of people saying Georgia Tech deserved the number one overall seed because of the quality of the team and the way they had dominated their schedule, opposed to UCLA, who there was a lot of times throughout the season where UCLA was winning games by the skin of their teeth, and the quality of their wins weren't of the same quality of Georgia Tech. So I understand that. But I still think you have to reward the resume. And UCLA had the best resume. They were ranked number one wire to wire on basically every public college baseball top 25. They were number one. And I don't think there was any reason to change that after they had won the Big Ten tournament. In hindsight, obviously they dropped two games to an auto bid who wouldn't have been in the tournament otherwise in St. Mary's. So maybe you do look back and think maybe there did have to be an adjustment a little bit on our view of UCLA, just because they did play in the Big Ten, which was it's not a weak conference, but a weaker conference compared to the SECs and the ACCs of the world. But I think this is just a matter of not necessarily that UCLA wasn't as good as we thought they were, but it was more so because of the chaotic nature of the game of college baseball. And UCLA falls to St. Mary's in that first game. If not for that ninth inning comeback, where you have Mulavai Lavu and Roman Martin going back to back to tie the game in the ninth inning against Virginia Tech, you're talking about UCLA getting out of the tournament without having won a single game, which is just unreal to think about considering UCLA didn't lose consecutive games at any point this season. They didn't lose a single weekend, so they never lost two games in a weekend. They did lose. There was one time throughout the year where they did lose 2 out of 3 games in a stretch. I think they lost the final game of their series against Washington, and then they lost like the second game of their series against Oregon. But still, those losses were a week apart. So the consistency throughout the season for UCLA, then you look at this weekend, and it's just unreal that they went down in the fashion that they did, and that it was St. Mary's to do it. And then the other thing on top of St. Mary's taking down UCLA in 2 games in the same 2 games or in the 2 games that they played them is that St. Mary's doesn't even win that Los Angeles regional. It's Cal Poly, and Cal Poly has kind of like I feel like they haven't gotten enough love. Like they haven't got the love that they deserve for winning that regional. Because I do think that St. Mary's has kind of gotten the attention there because they were the ones that took down UCLA. But Cal Poly just kind of dominated that regional. They didn't lose a single game. They beat Virginia Tech in the opener, and then they beat St. Mary's 14-1 in the winners bracket, and then they close it out against Cal Poly, Cal Poly closes out against St. Mary's in the regional final. And the thing I mentioned in my article about Cal Poly is the fact that they were a middle of the pack group when it came to pitching within the Big West. They were not by any means a team that you expect to pitch. And that's what they did this weekend. That's really the reason, because their offense was arguably the best offense in the Big West. We knew they were going to hit to some extent. But the fact that they only gave up a total of 5 runs in 3 games really speaks to the fact that this is a team that's hot right now. And they're catching a West Virginia team who, we'll talk about West Virginia later on. West Virginia had to really battle to get through their regional. And Cal Poly kind of cruised. The bullpen looked really good. The starters looked really good. And if they continue to hit, that's going to be a tough matchup for West Virginia. And we could be talking about a Cal Poly team on their way to Omaha. Across those 3 games, Cal Poly's bullpen didn't allow a single run in 8 innings of work. And then the starters combined for 4 earned runs across 17 innings of work. So just have the 1 unearned run there. So Cal Poly, if they continue to pitch, that's going to be an exciting super regional there in Morgantown. So shout out to Cal Poly. Should be a fun one this weekend. Now on to the Atlanta regional. This one hit close to home to me, for me. I'm not a Georgia Tech fan. I'm not a Georgia Tech graduate. I decided to cover Georgia Tech. I've talked about this on a recent video, but I covered Georgia Tech personally, like independently this year, because this is my first year covering college baseball, and I wanted to cover a specific team. So I chose Georgia Tech. I spent some time over there at McNeese Park this year. Had a lot of fun covering the team, but I don't claim to be a Georgia Tech fan. Really, just an awesome group of players there, awesome program. Watching them lose yesterday to Oklahoma, I felt like a piece of my heart was. I felt like a piece of my soul was taken from me. And like I said, I'm not a Georgia Tech fan or a Georgia Tech guy. And the way I described the feeling I had watching Georgia Tech lose the way they did yesterday was the same feeling I had watching the World Series last year and watching the Dodgers beat the Blue Jays in the way they did. And I'm not a Blue Jays fan. I'm not a Blue Jays guy. But it's kind of like the same vibe, like just like a super likable team, and then just the way that they lose was just so heartbreaking. And I remember thinking about that game 7 between the Blue Jays and Dodgers for literally like a month straight. I just thought about it every day. Like Miguel Rojas hitting that game-tying home run, like just replayed in my mind over and over and over again. And all the crazy plays that followed in extra innings. This final game between Georgia Tech and Oklahoma is one of those moments that I envision myself thinking about for a long, long time. Like just today, the day after, I've been thinking about it all day, and just how heartbreaking that loss was for Georgia Tech. And you consider the fact that Georgia Tech came out super hot. They beat Illinois Chicago 22-5. Then they beat Oklahoma 9-3 in the winners bracket. So it's like, okay, whoever comes out of the losers bracket to play the Yellow Jackets in the regional final, it's going to be a cakewalk. And then you get Oklahoma, you blow that, I think it was a 8-2 lead, I think, in that first game. Oklahoma goes on to win 15-8, and then you get the final game. Georgia Tech once again has a lead. I think they're leading 7-2 in the 5th inning, 6th inning, and then Oklahoma just puts it together, tied in the 9th, and then Dayton Taki with just an absolute gut punch, but like a super cool moment at the same time. Because you think about like every kid like dreams of hitting a walk-off home run, in a big moment like this, and then you add on the fact that he went dead center like 450. Like that's like in every kid's dream, and for him to do that in that moment as a senior there at Oklahoma, just a super cool moment for the Sooners, but a gut punch for Georgia Tech. Because, once UCLA fell and they were out of the bracket, it's like, even coming into the tournament, I just talked about the fact that there was an argument for Georgia Tech to be the number 1 overall seed. but you had to respect UCLA's resume. There were still, I would still say that there were far more people taking Georgia Tech to win the Natty, maybe even also Georgia, than UCLA. And so once UCLA falls, it's like, okay, this is your clear favorite to win the College World Series, just because of how they had early on they had steamrolled through their regional. And it's like, okay, they slip up in that first game against Oklahoma. The bullpen doesn't hold up. It is what it is. They're not world beaters on the mound. It's gonna happen. And then for them to lose back to back games at home, that's where the real gut punch is there. Because Georgia Tech, they lost consecutive games one time all season, and that was to North Carolina on the road in Chapel Hill. They never lost two in a row at home all season. And for Oklahoma to do what they did was just a testament to Skip Johnson and just to the coaching staff that they got there, just the experience of that group. It was I wouldn't say it was an underwhelming season for Oklahoma. They come into the season unranked, and then they do make some noise early in the season, and then they kind of fade away towards the end of the season. Still good enough to get a 2 seed, but no one was really. There were some key series where it's like, okay, yes, we can see this 2 seed upsetting this 1 seed. Like, for instance, a lot of people were taking Arkansas over Kansas. A lot of people were taking Ole Miss over Nebraska. No one was taking Oklahoma over Georgia Tech. Right. And then what it came down to for Georgia Tech was the pitching. And that's what was looming over them all year was, are they going to be able to pitch enough? Which halfway through the season, I was convinced that they were going to. Because, the starters, by the end of the season, you only had two solidified starters. You had Tate McKee and you had Jackson Blakely. And then that third spot was kind of, by committee. But the bullpen was really good. The bullpen went on about a 1 month stretch where they were one of the best bullpens in the nation. So I was convinced that they were going to pitch enough to where all they had to do was show up and hit, and they were going to win ball games. But there was still that little thing at the back of everyone's mind, like, okay, when they get into the postseason, is this pitching actually going to be enough? And it wasn't enough when it mattered. Right. And a credit to Oklahoma's pitching staff as well. Georgia Tech put up 24 runs in the 3 games that they played against each other, 15 in the final 2. But Oklahoma's bullpen, I think, really deserves some credit because I don't have the box score in front of me right now, but I believe in those final 2 games, from the 5th inning on, Georgia Tech doesn't score. And it's rare that you see a stretch of innings in which the Jackets are held scoreless. And so for the bullpen to show up in that type of moment and to essentially hold them off for as long as it did to help Oklahoma's offense climb back into those games was super impressive and gives them a very good outlook as they head to Kansas to take on another high-powered offense, which I think is going to be an excellent matchup. The only people that Oklahoma fans are happier than are Kansas fans, because if Georgia Tech had won this regional, Kansas would be traveling to Atlanta to take on the Jackets, but rather now Kansas gets to stay at home and host I think it's their first ever super regional, and they showed out for their regional with Arkansas, and it was awesome. And so they're going to keep it rolling there in Lawrence, take on Oklahoma. It's going to be a lot of fun. So Georgia Tech, that was the team of destiny, man. That was a team of destiny. You got all the prospects. You just, an excellent transfer class. It's a gut punch for sure. Haven't been to a super regional since 2006, and they've been in the mix for many of those years since. They're a team that's consistently in the tournament essentially, and still can't get it done. I know James Ramsey is going to catch a lot of flack for the decisions he made at the end of that game. He's a first-year head coach. He really managed with his guts. I kind of talked about this in my article. It's like, yeah, probably left Mason Patel in too long. Yeah, probably shouldn't have gone to Tate McKee in that moment there. But I think he really did manage with conviction. I think he might have become a prisoner of the moment in a sense. Because, when Tate McKee got out there, he threw over 100 pitches on Saturday. So he's pitching on really 1 day's rest. And as soon as he took the mound, you could tell from watching on TV that he didn't have it. He wasn't getting any types of whiffs inside the zone. He wasn't getting chased outside the zone. And then he narrowly escapes that ninth inning to where Oklahoma ties it. I think there's one out, and then he gives up a walk and a single. And so Oklahoma's threatening to walk it off right there. And then he narrowly escapes. And then he's trotting back out there for the 10th. I'm like, I don't know about this Ramsey. I don't know how I'd feel about him going back out there. I don't know what their what their bullpen look off the top of my head. I don't know what their bullpen looked at the time, but there had to be somewhere else in there that was fresher that he could have gone to. But at the end of the day, I will always appreciate a manager that lays it on the line and that makes a decision that he knows if it backfires, it's not going to be a good look. But he put it on the line, and I know he was willing to own up to that in the post game presser. You're talking about a first-year head coach, just an absolute, regardless of the talent he essentially inherited. Regardless of that, just an excellent season for him in his first year at Georgia Tech, and super excited to see what he does here in the next couple of years. Georgia Tech going home prematurely. I was really hoping to see Von Lackey just show out for the rest of that postseason, Drew Burress as well. And I will say a quick note on Von Lackey and Rock Chalowski. Let's not act like their teams getting knocked out of the playoffs early has any effect on their draft stock. It doesn't. The only effect it has on their draft stock is that if they had remained in the tournament longer, they would have just had more time to boost their profiles. The fact that their team lost should not affect their draft stock at all. So if that's in your mind, let's just get away from that now. And I'll save my thoughts for the draft in my next draft video. But a little teaser, Von Lackey might be number 1 overall. He might be. 456-foot home run in Game 1 against Illinois Chicago. 468-foot home run against Oklahoma in that first winner's bracket game. Let me not get carried away, but I might be getting to the point where if I was the White Sox, I'm taking Von Lackey 1-1. Number 3 overall seed, Georgia. They're the highest remaining seed in the tournament. I think they're pretty easily the favorite right now to win the whole thing. They would be my pick right now. Just a complete team, just playing their best baseball right now. Finished the regular season strong. And then they did draw a regional that I think was underrated in a sense. You get Liberty as the 3 seed, and Liberty probably had a case to be a 2 seed. And you get Boston College as the 2 seed. And then Long Island, who came in pretty hot, regardless of the fact that they were like one of the lowest RPI teams in the tournament. They're a team that came in hot, and we saw that there was no 1 seed that was safe in this tournament. So they drew a pretty tough regional, I would say, in my opinion, but they handled business in pretty convincing fashion. They take down Long Island 18-2 in the opener. They get Liberty in the winner's bracket, beat them, and then they get Liberty again in the regional final. Obviously, the big storyline here, there was really no storylines in terms of upsets or crazy games. The opening game of the regional, Liberty and Boston College, that was a back and forth matchup up until the end. I think Liberty was down going into the 9th and took a lead there. So you did have some drama there. But for the rest of the regional, wasn't really any games of note. The big thing coming from it is the fact that, the Trey Phelps ejection. I'm not going to harp on that too long. My 2 cents is that I thought it was a lame ejection. Apparently, he was not even chirping at the dugout when he was rounding the bases. He was looking up at his parents. Even if he was chirping at the dugout, I don't think it was that excessive of a celebration. Obviously, that's up to everybody's interpretation. But I know the umpires have a difficult job. I don't really appreciate them. I don't appreciate the ump show. I just don't. And Trey Phelps is going to miss the first game of the Super Regional against Mississippi State. And it's like, what for? The kid was celebrating. They're playing at the highest level of amateur baseball. Let them play. And I know Liberty took offense to it, to whatever he did. It is what it is. So that's a big loss for Georgia in that Game 1. But like I said, they're too complete of a roster, too complete of an offense right now for me to be super concerned. They haven't lost a series since, I want to say it was early April that they dropped that series to Florida. They already beat Mississippi State in a series this year. And so I'm still pretty confident in saying Georgia's going to win that Super against Mississippi State. But we'll jump into that a little bit later. Jump on down to the Auburn Regional. This one got off to a pretty fun start. Milwaukee kind of boat races Auburn in that opening game. I think they were the first 4 seed to win over the weekend. So Milwaukee wins, and then it's kind of the domino effect from there. St. Mary's beats UCLA. St. John's gets Florida State. Little Rock gets Southern Miss. That regional starts off with a bang with Milwaukee getting Auburn. And then Milwaukee goes on to beat UCF in the winners bracket. So Milwaukee is set up they're on to the regional final. And then Auburn has to beat Milwaukee twice, which they do. And neither of those games were super close, but super fun to see Milwaukee do that. I believe the stat I saw was that they were 5-22 at some point in the season. And then they obviously upset Wright State in the Horizon League to get into the tournament. And then, beating Auburn alone in that opening game, and then UCF to get to a regional final. Super cool stuff for that program. Luckily, Auburn does kind of turn it around. Jake Marciano gets ambushed by Milwaukee's offense in that first game. Auburn's pitching staff is one that I believe that they're at least the best starting rotation in the country. You got 4 legit starters there. They obviously get exposed by Milwaukee in that first game. Like I said, just kind of like ambushed. It doesn't make me really think anything less of Auburn's pitching staff. But then in that second game against NC State in the losers bracket, they still give up 13 runs. But then they kind of pull together. They beat UCF 9-3. And then they allow just 4 runs total between those last 2 games against Milwaukee. So if the pitching gets right, they're taking on Ole Miss in that super regional at home, second super regional in Auburn in a row. That pitching gets right, I still feel confident in them going to Omaha. Jump on down to the Chapel Hill regional, 5th overall seed, North Carolina. North Carolina did draw a very tough regional. East Carolina, Tennessee, VCU, who was hot, and they just kind of quietly go about their business, and they beat VCU 8-0 in the opener. They go on to beat East Carolina 7-5 in the winners bracket. And then they get East Carolina again in the regional final, take them down 9-3. So it was kind of just business as usual for North Carolina while everyone else was battling it out. Whoever comes up against North Carolina just gets beat. And in that opening game, you had East Carolina and Tennessee go 14 innings. East Carolina takes out Tennessee in that one. Tennessee ends up falling to VCU in the losers bracket, so they get out of the tournament without a win. Kind of a disappointing start to Josh Elander's career as head coach there for the Vols, but they'll be back at some point. And then East Carolina, they probably, outside of North Carolina, they looked the best in this tournament, but just weren't enough for North Carolina, and that pitching staff with theirs. And that offense for North Carolina is getting hot as well. Owen Hull, Gavin Gallagher, if they put it together, they look, I would put them on par with Georgia if they can hit enough, which they have shown at times that they can. So they'll be playing USC. So 2 years in a row, they'll get a West Coast team in their super regional. Last year was Arizona. Obviously, they came up short against Arizona last year. They'll get another shot at USC. That's gonna be a fun. That's probably gonna be the best pitching matchup of the supers. Is that USC pitching staff, which is excellent, and then North Carolina, which has obviously been excellent as well. Austin regional, Texas sweeps this regional. Had some good games outside of what Texas did. Obviously, Texas just steamrolls Holy Cross. But then kind of where the little bit of drama comes in is with UC Santa Barbara and Tarleton State. UC Santa Barbara decides to pitch off of Jackson Flora so that they could get the chance to pitch Jackson Flora against Texas in the winners bracket. However, I think they started Calvin Prosky in that first game, who solid arm, but he missed I think he might missed 2/3 of the season maybe due to injury. I know he came back later in the season, but had him go against Tarleton State, who puts up 11 on UC Santa Barbara. So UC Santa Barbara drops into the losers bracket, has to beat Holy Cross. So that's where they had to throw Jackson Flora in that game, because you can't not throw Jackson. Like if you go to a regional and you go 0-2 without throwing your ace, who is, in my opinion, the best pitcher in college baseball, you have completely dropped the ball there. So they have to throw him against Holy Cross in that losers bracket game, and then have to climb out of the losers bracket to try to win that regional, which they can't. They do come back and beat Tarleton State in that in their second meeting, but then they fall to Texas in the first game of that regional final. They would have to beat them twice. We probably wouldn't have seen Jackson Flora again, but close the book on Jackson Flora's college career. Still a top 5 pick for me. I know there's some variance on where he might land within the top 10. Honestly, that was the biggest thing I was watching for within like on the first day of regionals. That was kind of the biggest thing I was watching for was, okay, UC Santa Barbara has to beat Tarleton State, because I am praying that we get Jackson Flora versus Texas. But unfortunately, baseball gods did not have that much grace on us for that to happen. So Texas, I mean, Texas for me, I just talked about how North Carolina I would put in that tier with Georgia. I think Texas belongs in that same tier as well. I think they've kind of been overshadowed by Georgia a little bit because Georgia and Texas kind of same versions of a team. It's like it's the high powered offense and then kind of two horses at the front of your rotation. And I think Texas has just kind of taken a back seat to Georgia just because Georgia put together the better resume in the SEC this year. Texas wasn't too far off. So they're going to get Oregon, which we'll talk about Oregon here in a second. But Texas is set up just as good as Georgia, just as good as North Carolina to make it to Omaha. So I think this is a team that we might be, I would say we're sleeping on a little bit, but maybe a team that's not getting the attention it deserves, which is crazy to say because, the University of Texas sports gets all the attention. So definitely a team I would feel comfortable saying gets out of their super regional and gets to Omaha. So moving on to Alabama, Tuscaloosa Regional, seventh overall seed. It was kind of interesting seeing Alabama kind of roll through their regional. They did draw a pretty. I would say it was a weak regional, probably one of the weakest. Although Oklahoma State was for me was one of the better two seeds in the field. Why I find it surprising that Alabama did roll through their tournament or their regional is because Alabama was one of these teams like Florida, who we're going to get to, who were just a very inconsistent program this year. And so when you start to see these four seeds take down these one seeds, it's like it feels like Alabama's next on the chopping block because they had some bad losses throughout the season. So they seemed like a team that was susceptible to fall to a four seed. Now, on the other hand, they did draw Alabama State as their four seed, which was one of the lowest RPI teams in the tournament. But like I said earlier, no one was safe from four seeds in this tournament. So I would say props to Alabama for the way that they just steamrolled through their regional, beat Alabama State 21-3 in the opener, and then they get USC Upstate in the winners bracket. USC Upstate beats Oklahoma State in their opener. Alabama takes them down 7-5, and then they get Oklahoma State in the final, beat them 9-7. So Alabama looks good heading into supers. They'll get to host St. John's, another one of the two four seeds we'll talk about here in a moment. And then Florida is the third top 8 seed that drops their regional. Honestly, to me, I just mentioned how Florida was an inconsistent team this year, but regardless of that, I was far more confident in Florida winning their regional than Alabama because Florida has been here. Kevin O'Sullivan and his teams have been here before. You look back at 2024, Florida was they had a mediocre resume. I think they went 31-29 on the season. They get into the tournament as one of the last 4 teams in because they had the top strength of schedule in the nation. Obviously, the committee values strength of schedule. So teams with tough schedules get in regardless of the fact of what their season looked like, as long as they're a Power 4 team. And then Florida they roll through the Oklahoma State Regional. Then they get to Clemson, beat Clemson in the Clemson Super Regional 2-0, and then they get to Omaha. So it's like that's kind of the reason I was a bit higher on Florida than the rest of college baseball media throughout the season, was because I knew that regardless of the fact that Florida has some bad losses on their resume, I think they're going to rise to the occasion once the postseason comes around, and that just wasn't the case this year. In the opener against Rider, they looked like they were well on their way to a comfortable win. They let Ryder back into the game late. It takes a Brendan Lawson walk-off home run for them to beat Ryder in the opener. They do get Miami in the winners bracket, and looking at the score, it was 22-10 with 12-run blowout. But for much of the first half of that game, it was Florida continuing to let Miami back into that game before Florida ultimately pulled away late. But it was like, why did it end up being the pitching that was the downfall of Florida in this regional? Because the reason for their inconsistencies throughout the season was the offense. Sometimes they looked like world beaters at the plate, and sometimes they looked like they couldn't hit the broadside of a barn at the plate. And the pitching ended up being the downfall. They gave up 7 to Ryder in the opener. They gave up 10 to Miami in the winners bracket game. And then between the last 2 games against Troy, they gave up 26 runs. They gave up 16 runs to Troy in the opener of that regional final. And then they just go out in just very disappointing fashion in that final winner-take-all game, losing 10-2 to Troy. I don't know what to chalk it up to other than that the pitching just kind of laid a goose egg there in those last couple of games. And credit to Troy, hosting their first ever Super Regional. Who would have thought that Troy would be hosting a Super Regional in this year's tournament? But here we are. They're going to be hosting Little Rock. That is going to be... I'm a sucker for the mid-majors. I'm a sucker for the underdogs. That's the Super Regional I'm going to be tuned into most this weekend is Little Rock at Troy. 4 seed out of 3 seed, both mid-majors. Both have never been to a super regional. So obviously both have never been to Omaha. So this is almost like a little World Series in its own because neither team has been to Omaha. So the stakes are much higher than, Ole Miss and Auburn or Georgia and Mississippi State because neither of the teams have ever been here before. So they're playing for something that they've never won. So I'll get to Little Rock and Troy in a second when I get over to the Hattiesburg Regional. But shout out to Troy and that offense and what they did this weekend. Yeah, Florida just the nature of their inconsistency kind of caught up to them, I guess, in this one. And those is like throughout the regular season, I was willing to look past their bad losses because of the really good losses they had or the really good wins that they had. They were the only team to beat Georgia in a series all year, and they did it on the road in Athens. And so it's like I was willing to look past the home loss to High Point earlier in the season. I was willing to look past that because of the wins against Georgia, the wins against Arkansas, because the quality of the wins. They do more for me than the non-quality, so to speak, of the losses. So Florida, like I said, all year they were a tough team to project. And that remained the case at the end is like, what is this team? I don't know. But I really did think that they were going to figure it out in the postseason and kind of play up to the moment like they have done in past postseasons. But just wasn't the case this year, regardless of the pitching that was so good throughout the regular season. Moving on to Hattiesburg, this is where Little Rock won their regional. Little Rock last year takes LSU to the brink of the Baton Rouge regional. Little Rock pulls out that final game. We're not talking about LSU as reigning champions. So experienced group, a group that has been there and done that. They go into Hattiesburg. They win that opener against Southern Miss in comeback fashion in the 9th inning. They win 7-4. And then they just roll through this regional, which I thought this one had a case to be the toughest regional outside of Little Rock. Like coming into the tournament, I was like, okay, Little Rock, good little program. They upset the Ohio Valley. I think they finished 4th in the regular season standings there. And then they come in. It's like, okay, this is the team that could maybe steal a game. Not in the opener. I wasn't going to take them to beat Southern Miss in the opener. I was like, okay, maybe they drop in the losers bracket and win a game there, kind of like they did last year against LSU. But the reason that this regional stuck out to me because it's like you got Southern Miss hosting for the second year in a row, and then you've got Virginia, an experienced group with prospects. They had an underwhelming second half of the season, but certainly a team I could see making a run to Omaha. And then Jacksonville State, who, in my opinion, was the best 3 seed in the tournament. I thought they were a slam dunk 2 seed. There were points throughout the second half of the season where I said Jacksonville State should have been a host. They win the regular season in Conference USA, win the conference tournament. So I thought Jacksonville State was a sleeper to make it to Omaha as well. Like all 3 of those teams, Southern Miss, Virginia, and Jacksonville State, for me, had a case as teams that should have been picks to make it to Omaha. And then it's Little Rock that comes out victorious in this one. And they don't lose a game. They swept the regional. They beat Southern Miss. They beat Jacksonville State in the winner's bracket. And then they take down Jacksonville State again in the final. And that's another thing. Southern Miss, not only does Little Rock leave this regional without a loss, Southern Miss leaves it without a win. They dropped the opener to Little Rock. And then they lose to Virginia in what was which was a wild one in that first game in the losers bracket. But shout out to Little Rock. I know that the narrative around college baseball and really college sports in general is how NIL and the transfer portal are kind of ruining the competition. But and you could have looked at that 2 years ago in 2024. You had 4 SEC teams and 4 ACC teams in Omaha, which regardless of NIL and the transfer portal, that's going to happen at times because we do know the best baseball runs through SEC and ACC. So you're going to have that at times. But also last year as well, you had Coastal Carolina and Murray State in Omaha. And then this year you have Little Rock and St. John's in a super regional. And you had St. Mary's taking down UCLA, and the list goes on. So I think we're kind of fighting the boogeyman in a sense when we talk about NIL and the transfer portal ruining college baseball. I think honestly, I think college baseball is just I think it is the only sport truly exempt from that, if that makes sense. Like baseball is already one of the most Looney Tunes sports where anyone can win on any given day, which is also why I think it's ridiculous that we're trying to implement a salary cap and a salary floor in Major League Baseball because the Dodgers are winning every year. I don't think that the Dodgers are winning every year because they have the most money. I think the Dodgers are winning every year because they're the best run organization in baseball. So I think that there's nothing wrong with Major League Baseball. I think we're fighting the boogeyman in Major League Baseball. I don't think that there's any reason. I don't think there's any changes we need to make because I think the best organizations are going to be the ones that come out on top, whether that's Major League Baseball or college baseball. Little Rock obviously does not have the resources that an LSU has, that a UCLA has, that a Arkansas has, but they are a well-run program, and well-run programs are going to win baseball games. And that's what we saw this weekend is that you don't need the NIL, you don't need a strong transfer class to win baseball games in today's college baseball. You just don't. And I think that this weekend was a testament to the fact that this isn't a concern for college baseball. College baseball is as good as it ever been. The parity is as good as it has ever been. And maybe Major League Baseball will learn something from that. I don't think that they will. But for now, let's at least enjoy what college baseball has given us. So Little Rock, shout out to them. I think that Little Rock and Troy this weekend, I mean, I already mentioned that this is like the super regional I am watching. If I could choose one regional to go to, this is the one I'm going to. First super regional ever in Troy. Little Rock and Troy it's like the purest form of baseball when you think about it. And it's what makes college baseball so special and college sports so special is these two small programs playing for something that they've never had the chance to play for. And you also dig a little deeper, it's like Little Rock and Troy, neither of them, I mean, they have guys that are going to play professional baseball in some way, shape, or form at some point. But neither of these programs feature like top 100 draft prospects. So for a lot of guys in both of these programs, like this super regional is going to be their last chance to ever play baseball again, essentially. Like, because there are guys that are not going to go on to play professional baseball. So I think this series between these two teams is going to be like, it literally is going to be like baseball in its purest form because it's the highest level of amateur baseball. And like I said, a lot of these guys' careers are going to end after this weekend, and they're playing for something that they have never played for their programs. It's going to be electric. It's going to be cinematic. I don't think either team is going to boat race the other. I think it's going to go 3 games. I think we're going to get 2 really close games. So yeah, tune into Little Rock and Troy this weekend. If you come away with anything from this video, it's tune into Little Rock and Troy this weekend. With that being said, we move on to the Tallahassee Regional. 10th overall Florida State. The other regional in which the number 4 seed comes out on top. You got St. John's. And not only does the 4 seed win this regional, but they do it in the same way that Little Rock did, and they sweep it. So St. John's, and also just like Little Rock, in that first game, late game comeback, and 1-run win there for St. John's. And then you had Coastal Carolina in this regional. Coastal Carolina comes away without a win. They dropped their first game to Northern Illinois, and then Florida State beats them 2-1 in that losers bracket game. So Coastal Carolina, reigning champs, come away with or not reigning champs, reigning runner-ups from last year, come away with 0 wins in the tournament. It's kind of funny to look back on like year over year, seeing how last year's Omaha teams fared in the following year. This year, LSU, your reigning champs, miss out on the tournament completely. Coastal Carolina get in the tournament, but don't win a single game. Louisville misses the tournament altogether. Arizona misses the tournament altogether. Arkansas gets bound. I think they won well, we'll get around to the Lawrence Regional here in a second, but I think they only won one game, get bounced in regionals. UCLA wins one game, gets bounced as the number one overall seed, and then Murray State obviously doesn't make the tournament. So literally, last year's Omaha teams won a total of 2 games in this year's tournament, which also goes back to my previous point about the state of college baseball. The parity is as good as it has ever been because it's not like the NL West in Major League Baseball where the Dodgers just win it every year. And it's, you don't have the same teams in the playoffs every year, which you don't in MLB, but you do still kind of have those same top teams represented every year. So it just goes back to my point. Don't split arguing about NIL and transfer portal. College baseball is in a perfect spot, and St. John's is another example here. So then St. John's goes on to beat Northern Illinois in the winners bracket, beat them 21-8, and then they get Florida State again in that regional final, take them down 5-4. I believe that was a walk-off, wasn't it? No, it wasn't a walk-off. That's right. St. John's was up. I think they were up 5-1 in the ninth, and then Florida State tried coming back. They came back within one, and then St. John's does close that out. So shout out to St. John's. They go to Tuscaloosa this weekend, take on Alabama. Another one where it's like I said with Alabama, it's like coming into the tournament, they were probably the top 8 seed that I would have been most confident betting against. I don't know how I feel about them after having watched Alabama kind of just comfortably win their regional. Now I feel a little bit better about them, but now that you got this St. John's team that's hot going into Tuscaloosa to play a team that has been a little bit inconsistent this year, it's like it almost feels like a trap series for Alabama. So I think that's going to be a good one for sure. And then obviously it's just a fun storyline seeing an underdog like this take on one of the powerhouses of Division I baseball. So excited for that regional as well. St. John's in Alabama. The Eugene regional, your 11th overall seed, Oregon Ducks. That was one I was super excited for because you had Oregon State in that regional. So you were potentially going to get an Oregon State regional final, which you did. And Oregon State took care of business. They sweep this regional. It was an interesting one because Oregon State was a consensus top 10 team on top 25s throughout the season. They were consistently ranked above Oregon on top 25s. But then obviously Oregon gets the nod as the host because of the resume. And I think, well, I've talked about this on a recent video, but this is a reason why I'm going to kind of rework how I do my top 25s next year. But yeah, Oregon proves that they are the better team. They wax Yale in that opener, and the Oregon State falls to Washington State as well in their opener 3-2. But then Oregon State comes back around, beats Washington State in the losers bracket, which sets up Oregon State in the regional final. Oregon takes them down 4-1. Obviously, Oregon State misses Dax Whitney in that regional. Obviously could have gone much differently if he was there and healthy. But shout out to Oregon for taking down Oregon State. That was for sure the closest pairing between 1 and 2 seeds. It's like obviously each one had a case to host. Oregon State probably the best 2 seed in the tournament. So kind of a fun matchup there at the end. College Station, 12th overall seed, Texas A&M. I believe this is one of two seeds to win their regionals. So you have Texas A&M take down Lamar in the opener, and then USC, who comes out of this regional, they actually dropped their first game to Texas State and then had to win 4 in a row to win. So USC, they lose to Texas State 5-4 in that opener, and then they take care of business against Lamar. And then they get Texas State again, in which they take care of business against 15-4 in the losers bracket, setting up for the regional final, in which they would have to beat Texas A&M twice, which was not an easy thing to do in College Station this year. I don't remember their home record off the top of my head, but I know it was one of the best home records in the nation. And USC pretty handedly takes down the Aggies 14-3 in that first one, and then 7-1 in that final game, which goes to show just how good that USC pitching staff is. Mason Edwards went earlier in the regional. You get Grant Govell and Andrew Johnson, I believe it was, in those final 2 games. So you didn't even have to throw your ace, and you only give up 4 total runs against one of the best offenses in the country, which is why that USC North Carolina super regional is going to be super intriguing because that is genuinely two of the best pitching staffs in the nation. And I don't think we're really getting a pairing of, outside of Ole Miss and Auburn, we're not really getting a pairing of pitching staffs like we are with this USC North Carolina matchup. And also, you get two Big Ten teams in supers. You get USC and Oregon, two teams in which UCLA beat in the regular season this year. And here we are with UCLA on the couch and USC and Oregon moving on. So just another thing that goes to show just how crazy this game can be. And shout out the Big Ten. They get more super regional teams than the ACC. The ACC came into the tournament with 9 teams, and they leave regionals with 1, and the only one being North Carolina, who's the standard of the ACC at this point. So USC, North Carolina, I would imagine we get Mason Edwards in that opener against North Carolina. Should be a fun one. And another opportunity for Mason Edwards to boost that draft stock. We had a couple pitchers last year, Gage Wood, Cade Anderson, kind of used the postseason to increase their draft stock. And a lot of these top players are out of the tournament. And so I was looking at my draft board earlier. It's like most of the draft prospects remaining in this regional are more so guys in your like 20 to 75 range. A lot of your top prospects are out of the picture. So kind of some of these guys lower down the board, maybe looking to push themselves into the first round, are going to get their chance to do that in these final 2 to 3 weeks here of the tournament. Moving on to the Lincoln Regional. This is where Nebraska hosted as the 13th overall seed. Another regional that had the case as the toughest one. You get Ole Miss as the 2 seed. You get Arizona State as the 3 seed. Ole Miss had a case of their own to be a host, so they were one of the best 2 seeds in the field. Arizona State had a case to be a 2 seed, so probably one of the best 3 seeds in the field. And then South Dakota State in there kind of evens the field a bit, since the top 3 there are so top heavy there in that regional. But Ole Miss sweeps that regional. Obviously got the 14-inning game against Arizona State in the opener there, and then they take down Nebraska in the winner's bracket, and then they beat Arizona State again, and I believe they won that via walk-off, right? Yeah, walk-off sac fly, Dominic Decker in that final game against Arizona State in that rematch. Ole Miss moves on in Omaha for the second time in this decade. Obviously, they won it all in 2022 as one of the last 4 teams in. So, a program that has been there and done that. They're taking on Auburn, classic SEC matchup. 2 very strong pitching staffs. Obviously, Ole Miss, Hunter Elliott, Cade Townsend, Taylor Rabe, who is a recent draft riser. Auburn, it's Jake Marciano, it's Andreas Alvarez, Alex Petrovich. So you're gonna get at least 2. I mean, this series probably goes 3, but you're gonna get at least 2 very solid pitching matchups in that super regional, and then 2 offenses that can get it done as well. So honestly, might be the most evenly matched. Maybe not the most. Yeah, I might say this is the most evenly matched, just because I do think that the pitching staffs are comparable. And I do think that Ole Miss maybe has a higher ceiling offensively than Auburn, but I do think that think that ceiling for Auburn pitching is a little higher than Ole Miss. So I mean, I could see this series going in many different ways, but I do think it is. I would say it's the most evenly matched, and then probably USC North Carolina, just because the pitching staffs are very comparable there as well. But like I said, another fun classic SEC matchup: Ole Miss and Auburn. Your 14th overall was the Mississippi State Regional. Mississippi State was a team that I didn't think that should be hosting. I thought Arkansas deserved the hosting bid over them. But then they proved me wrong. And I'm glad to say that. They sweep their regional, put a beating on Lipscomb in the first game, and then they get Cincinnati in the winner's bracket, who they beat pretty handedly. And then they get Louisiana in the final, who they also handle by a score of 19-5. So Cincinnati and Louisiana, I thought, were not easy. Neither of them were an easy draw for Mississippi State, but they handled that regional with ease on their way to the Super Regional. So I do think that, regardless of the fact that I think that Georgia is the better team in the Super Regional, They are catching Mississippi State at the wrong time because Mississippi State is hot. They end the regular season on a weak note, but they kind of silence the doubters, the haters, including myself, that said they shouldn't have hosted. And they take down two very good programs in Cincinnati and Louisiana to get back to a super. So I think that Athens Super Regional is going to be closer than we might be making it out to be because I think Mississippi State can steal a game there just because they are hot right now and they're healthy as well. I know that they've got Ryan McPherson back in that rotation, and I do think that the Georgia pitching staff is a little bit more volatile as well. We do give it credit for the fact that they do have Volchko and Big U at the front of that rotation, and then some strong bullpen arms as well. But I do think it is. I do think it's a little bit of a volatile rotation, and it's one that Mississippi State, if the bats come out hot, they could get one early in that series and put Georgia on the ropes. But another classic SEC matchup there as well. Your 15 seed Lawrence Regional, Kansas. This was kind of the one that everyone had their eye on because Kansas not been in this position in a very long time. And then you have Arkansas in as the 2 seed, which, in my opinion, Arkansas should have been a host. So they were, you had Oregon State, you had Oklahoma State, you had Ole Miss as 2 seeds who had cases as the best 2 seeds in the tournament. Arkansas was the best 2 seed in the tournament. I thought they should have been hosting based on how they finished their season. And so it was kind of an easy regional to pick the 2 seed just because Arkansas has been there. They're 1 year removed from being in Omaha. And then you have Kansas, a team built with a lot of JUCO and D2, D3 guys. Just a team that hasn't been there and done that. And it just seemed like the perfect spot for Arkansas to steal this regional. But Kansas just sweeps it. Beat Northeastern 6-3 in the opener. They get Arkansas in the winner's bracket. Beat them 5-3. And then get them again in the regional final. Beat them 13-10. So shout out to Kansas, proved me wrong. I took Arkansas to win that one. And then, obviously, like I talked about with Georgia Tech earlier, they're going to get the chance to host a Super Regional. So not only are they probably glad they're getting Oklahoma over Georgia Tech, but they're also super glad that they are getting to host that Super Regional as opposed to going on the road to Atlanta to take on Georgia Tech. So my outlook on Kansas becomes just a lot more better considering that they were able to beat Arkansas in both times that they played in this regional in Lawrence. Oklahoma, they pull off the impossible and beat Georgia Tech, so who's not to say they can't go into Kansas and win that one. But with the way Kansas looked in this regional, it's tough for me to say that Oklahoma could do it twice in a row and go in to a hostile environment and beat a high-powered offense like Kansas. So I'm going to lean Kansas in this one. And then your final regional was your Morgantown regional, which I highlighted in my article, in my regional recap article, as the most electric one. Kentucky is your 3 seed in this one. I didn't think Kentucky should have been in the tournament, but it ended up looking like it was going to be one of those classic cases of a 2024 Florida, like I mentioned, an underwhelming team that gets in and just gets hot at the right team, an experienced group, and then just kind of rolls through a regional. And it looked like that was going to be the case for Kentucky. They beat Wake Forest in that first game in a close one. And then they get West Virginia in the winner's bracket, and they beat West Virginia. West Virginia comes back, beats Wake Forest in the loser's bracket to take on Kentucky. They got to beat Kentucky twice in a row. And both of these games, Kentucky had a chance to win. Most certainly in that first game. I believe they're up 9-6 going into the 9th inning. And then just a series of unfortunate events. I believe there was 2 walks and a single. And then you have the balk that brought in the game-tying run. And then the not a walk-off home run. Because they were the visiting team in that game. Which is kind of ridiculous to me. Just a side note, ridiculous to me that I think a benefit of hosting a regional is that you should be the home team in all of those games. But it is what it is. And then it's Paul Schoenfield getting that go-ahead home run in the top of the 9th. Just absolute scenes there in Morgantown. And then they hold on to in the bottom of the 9th to send it to a winner-take-all game. And then West Virginia actually wins via walk-off. another close one, but one in which West Virginia is winning in that one. Kentucky climbs back into the game. Tie it. I believe West Virginia was up 5-1, and then Kentucky scores 4 in the eighth to tie it up. And then in the bottom half of the ninth, you get the walk-off base hit by Armani Guzman. And then obviously you get the just an unreal moment with the entire stadium singing Country Roads with the team there. Just another thing that makes college baseball special and college sports in general. Just a fun scene there in Morgantown. So they will pull Cal Poly in this super regional, who I talked about at the very beginning of the video, winning that LA regional. So a West Virginia team that kind of had to find a way to piece it together in this regional. And then the Cal Poly team that just kind of dominated their regional. So you kind of get two different sides of the coin in this super regional, which should set up for a fun matchup. So I'm going to rapid fire through these super regionals and give you who my pick is to win. So I haven't even thought about who I'm going to take to win. As I've been going through this video, I've kind of my thought process has started on who I want. But right now. I'm just going to rapid fire, not even thinking. I am just going to rapid fire my answers, my gut reaction right off the rip. Going through these: West Virginia, Cal Poly. I'm taking West Virginia. North Carolina, USC. I'm taking North Carolina. Troy, Little Rock. I'm taking Little Rock. Auburn, Ole Miss. I am taking Auburn. Oklahoma, Kansas. I'm taking Kansas. Oregon, Texas. I'm taking Texas. St. John's, Alabama. Give me St. John's. Mississippi State, Georgia. Give me Georgia. That's all 8, right? If what I say happens, which is obviously going to be the case, right? This is what the Omaha bracket would look like. You would have West Virginia versus Little Rock, and you would have North Carolina versus Auburn. And then you would have Georgia versus... Wait, no, who's the two? You would have Kansas versus Alabama and Georgia versus Texas. I didn't even fact check myself there. I don't know if I'm right. That's just right off the dome, I believe. But that's what you have. You'd have Georgia, West Virginia, North Carolina, Little Rock, Auburn, Kansas. That's right. I didn't say St. John's. You'd have St. John's versus Kansas, right? Yeah, St. John. Obviously, you can tell where my head is at the moment. Too much going on in the baseball world for me to process anything correctly in my mind. So with that being said, this video is going to come to an end. Super regionals this weekend. Hopefully this video is out by Wednesday morning. Gives you a chance to continue to either mourn your team's loss in the regionals or celebrate your team's win, or to just reflect on what happened over the weekend and then look forward to super regionals, which I'm looking forward to. I don't believe the upsets are over. I think one of these 4 seeds are going to get in. I don't think all of these 1 seeds are confirmed. It's going to be a lot of fun. Be on the lookout for more super regional coverage. Obviously more draft coverage as well coming. Mock Draft 4.0 is on the horizon. Yeah, and then follow the if you're subscribed to the YouTube, you might have seen some of the shorts. I did a short for each regional previewing that. Plan to do the same thing with super regionals, and then I'll also posting them on Instagram and TikTok as well. So I'll post the links to those in the description below, so you can go follow there as well. And then of course go follow myself on Twitter, where I have additional coverage, just random stuff, whether it be college baseball, draft, MLB prospects. So yeah, thanks for tuning in, and probably check in again after the super regionals to recap that and then look ahead to Omaha. So here we are getting to the end here. So thanks for tuning in, and we will see you on the next one.